Hello there, Paphos, Cyprus, late October 2020. Helping out with the Cyprus Mouflons, we've just recently welcomed our first Para Dragon, Bobby, wheelchair athlete, and he's also a wheelchair basketball player as well. And it links me back to a series of interviews I did a few months ago with Mr. Nigel Bedford, the chair of the IDBF Para Athletes Commission. I reviewed two documents, two segments of which I've published, and the second I'm just about to publish now. And the second interview centered on this particular document here, and it is the IDBF Para Athletes Commission return to dragon boating in a coronavirus environment. You can find it on the IDBF website. Go to documents and then COVID-19 safety plan. What's interesting and pertinent about this particular document is it's quite universal. It's very unlike the other return to dragon boating plans because it's not country specific. It's quite universal, as I say, and it relates to lots of the issues relate to clubs, teams, organisations, whether or not they have para athletes in their midst, in their membership. So have a look at it, and also have a look at the interview. Very interesting, always talking to Nigel, and I hope you enjoy the interview. And the second segment, I think it's about 16 minutes, the second segment follows very shortly. Okay, good morning everybody. A glorious return of Mr. Nigel Bedford from the Para Athletes Commission. Today we're talking about a second of two documents that you've produced fairly recently. This is the IDBF Para Athletes Commission, return to dragon boating in a coronavirus environment. Very interesting read, and I've got to say, anybody watching this, highly recommended that you read this. It's on the IDBF website, hopefully other places as well. Now, in the week that my own home organisation, the British Dragon Boat Association, has published their own 5 steps to heaven, 5 steps to returning. We're not quite at step 1 yet. It's quite a prescriptive document, and along with other documents, they follow a chronology, a step-by-step approach. But your document is fundamentally different, and that's really part of the reason I want to talk about it. So, firstly, why did you take a different approach? But before that, what is fundamentally different about your document as set against USDBF, the Canadian, the Singaporean, and the British documents, in your view?
Okay, I think I'm going to answer those, if I may, Tim, in reverse order. The reason the document is different is because, unlike a British document or an American document, we're dealing with every federation around the globe. So what might apply in the UK might not apply in the United States. Could apply in China, might not apply in India.
Yeah.
So we cannot provide one document that satisfies every national or federation requirement in a slightly prescriptive way.
Yeah.
So the document has to be different from the National Federation return to paddling guides that have been published.
Right.
How it is different, our document is different because it does not in any way try to set out what you must do in order to return to paddling.
Yeah.
What it does try and do is say to clubs and other organisations who might be interested, here are some things that you must think about, which will guide you. Those discussions around these points will guide your club in how to provide a safe environment for a return to paddling.
I think you make a really good point there because, excuse me, the British document is written for the British audience, and that is what will play in Britain. I read a similar and dissimilar document from Ireland some months ago, and that obviously plays in Ireland. And the two are, they're not fundamentally different, but they just play to the different audience. So what I think is great about this document, yes, it was written for the Para Athletes Commission, but it's got universal applicability, whether a club, an organisation is a para club or not. And that's what I like. I mean, I like it because it maybe that's the way my mind works, a bit more inclusive and a bit more wide ranging. But yeah, so the fundamental differences in your view, what are the key differences? I mean, anybody can look at this and it's a great read, a right riveting read, as they say. But why did you take that different approach? Apart from the fact that you're more universal. The way that it's set out is different as well.
Well, we started, one of the things we looked at initially was, as a simple example, social distancing.
Yeah.
So social distancing requirements around the globe are different.
Yes.
And they are changing. They're changing on a regular basis. In the UK, we've had a 2-metre requirement initially, which is relaxed if you're wearing face coverings.
Yes. Yeah.
So there are multiple ways of looking at social distancing. And what we recognised very early on, there was no point in trying, for example, to recommend types of boat layouts if the social distancing requirements were different in one country from another. Because what might be permitted in one country would almost certainly not be permitted in another country.
Yeah.
So we try to avoid anything where we said, these are things that you must do in terms of clinical guidance or anything else of that ilk. Instead, what we try to do is look at how you might return to dragon boating through the prism of a very, very valuable leadership model developed by a British professor called John Adair, called Action-Centered Leadership. And essentially, he said the best way to achieve optimum results is to look at the needs of the task, the needs of the team, and the needs of the individual. And if you can get the balance right between those 3 groups or 3 elements, you will achieve the best results.
I was very interested to see that. I mean, through my police career, and I'm sure you with other organisations, anybody who's done management in the UK will have come across the ACL model. And let's unpick that a little bit, because I think it's a fantastic and really appropriate way to deal with it. So just in a nutshell, what is the action-centered leadership model, if people aren't familiar with it, in a nutshell?
So John Adair came up with this idea that you have to look at the 3 elements of a particular activity in order to get the best results. You want to develop individuals. People want to grow in whatever they're doing. They want to become better people. They want to become fitter. They want to become stronger. They want to contribute more to society or to their group. They have their own needs. They want to earn money at the end of the day, perhaps. The group, the club, in our case, needs also to meet certain criteria. It wants to provide an environment which is attractive to participants. It wants to succeed in a sport, perhaps, if we're looking at dragon boating and action-centered leadership. It wants to provide a safe environment for all participants so it's not exposed to litigation. There are a whole range of things that the club needs to worry about, in addition to what the individual needs to worry about. And then sitting on top of it all, John Adair recognised ultimately you had a job to do.
Which is the task side of things.
The task, defining that mission in the military vernacular, defining that task in the club vernacular is critical, because if you don't know where you're going, it's very difficult to start on the journey.
I always, and we are of the same mind, because I always say to people, you have to have a rear view mirror. If you don't know where you've been, you won't know where you're going. But you need to have a rear view mirror. Otherwise, if you keep looking back all the time, you keep falling over. And all these things that we returned to, it chimed quite nicely with me. It struck me when you were talking about the club, obviously task, team, individual, in this case, the aim of the club and the group. But I was thinking about one of my own clubs, the Bournemouth Dragons. It's an all cancer survivors team. They're not a racing team, and their mission, their aim, their task is really just to get together and raise people's their being more sociable, raise their fitness, and they could actually achieve their aim by not even getting in a dragon boat at all. And it made me laugh, and it made me think. I thought, actually, okay, we're a dragon boat team, but really it's the community aspect of what we're doing first and foremost. And actually, in terms of some ACS teams and other teams as well, the dragon boat is the medium. Actually, the main task is getting people together, working together as a group, socialising, being more interdependent rather than independent. And that's really interesting. That. Go on.
Absolutely, Tim. And the approach we've adopted is, although we're calling this the Return to Dragon Boating Guide, it might not, the club the club might decide that the mission is not actually to return to a racing environment at all.
Yeah.
It might not even be, as you say, to return to even paddling.
Yeah.
It might just be to use dragon boating as the environment in which people can socialise. And you could do that potentially on dry land.
Yeah.
So the dragon boat is obviously essential to what you and I understand dragon boating to be. But the guide says that's for the club to decide. It's not for the IDBF to say this is what you must do. You must aspire to racing at the Club Crew World Championships or anything like that. It's simply saying you as a club exist. You've got some members, some of whom may be paradragons, all of them may be paradragons, but you want to return to some form of dragon boating environment.
Interesting you say that. I've just applied, this is neither here nor there, but I've just applied to go onto the council of the Cyprus Dragon Boat Federation. That's up to the voters, decide whether they think I'm a worthy person. But my ticket is safety, coaching scheme, and diversification. And that's not just dragon boat. That's outrigger, that's paddleboard, and moving people away from just focusing on racing down a straight line. Much as we love that, and I love doing that, but there's, I always say, if that is racing, this is paddling, this is water sports. And the more narrow your focus, perhaps, this is a personal view, then the harder it's going to hit that bullseye. But if your target is a bit bigger, then you will always, those teams that are diversing in paddling, single boats, O1s, OC1s, kayaks, whatever, paddleboards, they're still keeping together. They've had to modify and diversify what they're doing, because the key part to their raison d'etre, if you like, is to be a team doing a team activity. And they may not be able to do it in dragon boats for some considerable time. Yeah.
But I have to say, notwithstanding all of that conversation we've just had, the guide is about dragon boating. It's saying, this is our sport. This is the sport we love. How can we get back to doing it safely? And my commission's job is to inform the community that involves paradragons about how paradragons in particular can get back into the sport.
Right.
And that's my focus.
So looking at some of these specific challenges of paradragons, give me some examples of the sort of challenges you would imagine that, the paradragon category is so many and varied and diverse in itself, but just give us a snapshot of the sort of stuff you were thinking about in terms of getting them back in boats, or these individuals.
Well, first of all, potentially the paradragon community has a different level of vulnerability to the unimpaired community. Some people will have suppressed immune systems.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Some people have medications that might interact with the potential vaccine. We don't know at this stage. Some people may, because of an intellectual impairment or some form of post-traumatic stress disorder, not be fully aware of the consequences of coronavirus and how to avoid infection and so on. So the paradragon community has a number of challenges which are additional to those being faced by the unimpaired community.
Yes.
Just generally, just from a clinical perspective. Then you have some of the aspects associated with how a paradragon can actually perform in a dragon boat. First of all, he or she's got to get in the dragon boat. Now, if they've got a physical impairment or a sensory impairment, particularly visual impairment, they may need physical assistance to get into the boat.
Yeah.
So straight away, you're impacting on any social distancing requirements that the government or a federation or a landowner has imposed.
Yes.
That constraint might mean that only people in the paddler's social bubble are allowed to actually help them in and out of the boat.
Yeah.
So there are considerations there that don't perhaps apply always to the unimpaired community.
And frankly, that's what I like about your document, because it raises some, I read it and it gave me, I come away from it with more questions than answers, but they were the right sort of questions. You're thinking, well, how would that work? Exactly that point you made about assisting an impaired paddler into a boat, and it brought me on to an idea about having paddling pods that the pink community, the BCS community, have been doing in New Zealand. Mary Gibson started it some time ago. Great idea, and that's sort of spread out. But also in terms of just creating the dynamic where you've got a para members part of a normal regular club, if you like, if that's the right term. It may mean that they may create a division, because some of the para paddlers their return is going to be slowed down quite significantly, and that's going to be a challenge for management to deal with that particular situation, because it would look like maybe somebody's being ostracized when in fact it's just looking after their health, welfare and safety. It's going to create some issues that need careful management before the need to use them arises. That's what's good about this, because it just sets out some things that's interesting, and some possible mechanisms and how you're going to deal with those. So it's a welcome approach, really.
One of the issues, for example, that comes loud and clear from some federations' approaches is the need to minimise the number of paddlers in a boat. So some federations will say that you can't have more than 5, 6, 7 or 8 paddlers in a standard boat. And that's fine. And that's a prerogative of a federation, that's a prerogative of a government, whatever, to introduce those restrictions.
Yes.
But if some of those people are paradragons and are seriously impaired, you have other issues that then begin to arise. So let us take an example of somebody who's seriously impaired and the boat balance cannot be satisfactorily achieved because of an individual's body weight.
Yes.
And if you've got a requirement to only have so many paddlers in the boat and they've got to sit in particular seats, the boat may be less stable than would be ideal. But you take a decision as the coach or the helm that it's still manageable. So you go out on the water and you have an incident, and that seriously impaired paradragon is in the water.
Yeah.
You've had a capsize. You've now got to think through how you're going to deal with that. And there are multiple options, but one of the options you don't have is the ability for lots of unimpaired, strong swimmers to come up and assist the impaired paddler.
Yeah.
Because you've got fewer people in the boat straight away.
Right. Yes.
Secondly, some people might be wary of going up, even if it's to save somebody's life, because of the potential for getting coronavirus. Now, I'd like to think that 99.9% of the paddlers I know would throw that out the window and just say, there's somebody in dire need of assistance, I'm going in to help.
Okay.
But there is the possibility that people might be reluctant. So what does that mean? That means you might want to have a safety boat.
Yeah.
Even for a simple dragon boat training session, it might be sensible to have a safety boat. These are considerations that all the Commission's document is trying to do, is say, you need to think about this. It's not just, let's take out 8 paddlers. With paradragons and others, you've got to think through the consequences of an incident and how you might deal with it safely.
This came up, I think we were having a online conversation a few months ago about the situation when people started getting back into O1s, single boats, OC1s, and going out in groups of 6 or whatever. And what happens if somebody capsizes? And my take on it, and this is my personal take, if you're coaching, then you've got to recognise that if 1 or 2 people capsize, then your overriding fundamental responsibility is the safety of that person. If that means you come into close proximity with them, then you accept that risk. And if you're not prepared to accept that risk, don't go out. But the point is, I'm not saying that's the right approach. I'm saying that's my approach. But what was great about it is it raises that question quite rightly, that you're a coach, you're taking people out, you're considering that. Make sure people have some basic levels of skills, but what are you going to do? Are you prepared individually to take that risk? Now, I'm on 16 minutes. I'm going to hold you there. So hang on for a minute and we'll come back for part 2.